heavily regulated sector that's really good in terms of a specific problem for a tenant isn't very much good if that tenant can't find a house to rent. Well, the housing crisis actually is an affordability crisis. If you're not building enough houses, you will see prices going up. And we really thought we were going to go bust. I mean, we were beyond the overdraft limit. We had a couple of checks bounced. It was very unlikely we got through that winter, to be honest. Well, I'll tell you one view I don't subscribe to that I hear a lot from agents is there's enough to go around. There's not. There's not enough to go around.
Welcome to the third instalment of the Agents Journal three-part series about the housing crisis. In this episode, I'm joined by Kevin Hollinrake, Member of Parliament for Thirsk and Malton and Shadow Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. Kevin, thank you for being here.
Pleasure. Good to be here.
I want to start with your journey in business and your transition into politics. So if we could start right at the beginning, what were your early influences in life that led you to become an entrepreneur and start your own business?
My dad, initially. My dad was, you're three times more likely to go into business if your parents are in business. I don't know if your parents were, but...
They are, yes.
Well, there you go. And my dad, he was just a milkman, farmer, but he always encouraged myself, my brother and two sisters to go into business. And so I always wanted to do, that was a kind of, one of my kind of destinations in life, really. And so I started in business doing various things. I'm working market stall, selling everything from ladies' dresses to army surplus to all kinds of things. And then got into, I didn't have the self-discipline to be self-employed then, got into estate agency as a job, worked for a small independent, then went for Prudential Property Services. And then we set up Hunters in 1992. So with another mentor of mine, actually, a guy called John Waterhouse, who's, I think, going through business, you have a number of different people who influence your life, really. Mentors, you might call them. And John was another one, the number two, I guess. And we'd met in my first job in a estate agency, and we got on really well. And we decided one day we'd give it a go, and we did in 1992.
And what was the vision for Hunters at the very start? Was there a plan to grow it into the national brand that it's become? Or was that more of a kind of an evolution and something you kind of discovered as part of the journey?
No, it was always the plan. I mean, it's three simple objectives when we started out. Number one was to offer a brilliant service to the customer. And I felt in some of my previous jobs, previous companies I worked for, that wasn't always the case. So no, a brilliant service to the customer, but we wanted to win in the marketplace. We wanted to win in our local marketplace. And further afield, we wanted to be a national player. I've always wanted to have a scalable business that become national. And the third thing was have a lot of fun in the process. So it's three very simple objectives, but becoming a national player was very much what we hoped to do right at the start. We didn't quite know how we were going to get there.
But the vision was there.
But yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah. And what role do you think failure played in getting the business where it is today? Was this your first business? I mean, you alluded to working on market stalls and other bits and bobs. But I always think that failure seems to be a common stepping stone in an entrepreneur's journey. Is there any pivotal failures that you had that now you can reflect back on and see as a essential part of the journey?
So many. I mean, I described my business career the way that Churchill described the Americans. He said the Americans always do the right thing, but only after they've tried all the alternatives. And that was like my business career. Lots of things where you got it wrong. It was, all the failures I had in business, they were smaller businesses really, were down to my lack of self-discipline, really, lack of application. And this was a key moment. We opened in 1992, April that year. Remember, September that year, we had Black Wednesday. You're too young to remember. Black Wednesday, when interest rates went to 10%, with base rates from 10% to 15% in a single day. And it was a desperately difficult back end to that year. And we really thought we were going to go bust. I mean, we were beyond the overdraft limit. We had a couple of checks bounced to our big, to the local press and to the Yorkshire Post, and really, really tough. And I think it was very unlikely we got through that winter, to be honest, John and I. But I think that was a number of seminal moments, I would say. That was the first of them, getting through that winter. And it seems sometimes things are so bad that there's no way they can get better. And my learning in business is when you hit those really dark times, so if you keep working at it, a chink of daylight sooner or later comes. And it did. Early 93, the market started to pick up again. And so getting through that was a seminal moment and gave us a bit of resilience, I think.
There's another Churchill quote there, I think, isn't there? If you're going through hell, keep going.
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah,
definitely. And that's exactly what happened. And we learned a huge amount going through that process. But most importantly, the resilience to keep carrying on, because we needed that later in life in our business journey as well.
That's resonates with me, because I think over... since 2022, 2023, the market did change quite drastically for us in the East Midlands, and we'd been on an upward trajectory since forming the business. And there was times, I think, over the past couple of years where I suppose you didn't know how the next few months were going to go. Cash flow becomes a problem. But if you keep going, we've seen the business completely turn a corner just through having the resilience to keep doing it.
In my experience, you'll reflect on those times, and you'll have more memories of those times than any other in your business journey when things were tough. And even a lot of humour you go through there, a lot of the funny stories I can think of in the past, that you really you have those on the basis that you remember how tough it was, and that, like I say, is where your source of resilience is.
Yeah. And so Hunters now, I recently saw that they were the 6th biggest agency in the country in terms of number of sales, so that puts you ahead of Foxtons, Savills, Spicer Hart. It is a mammoth agency. So you clearly know how to bring the right people together and make it a success. So just before we move on to politics, what do you think makes a good estate agent? And then I've got another question around estate agency, which is, what's your view on kind of the future regulation of estate agents?
Well, I'll tell you one view I don't subscribe to that I hear a lot from agents is there's enough to go around. There's enough to go around. We can all work together. There's not. There's not enough to go around. You have to. So the answer to is you've got to be extremely competitive. You've got to want to win in the marketplace, and that was back to one of the objectives I said earlier. So I think in terms of success as a business level, you've got to be a winner. You've got to be determined. You've got to be competitive. Of course, lots of other things as well. You need to be personal, of course. You need to work hard. You need to make sure that your branding's in the right place. There's only 3 elements to any business in the world: lead generation, lead conversion, customer fulfillment. Now, if you're an agent worth your salt, lead conversion, actually, if you've got a valuation, making it into a listing, a reasonable hit rate, and customer service should be like falling off a log. It should be pretty straightforward if you know your stuff. Where most agents go wrong is lead generation. They don't spend enough time generating new opportunities, new valuations, new viewing leads, generally new valuations, and that's hard yards. There's no silver bullet to that. So, we had what we call the big rocks in Hunters, which are 5 key things every office had to do every single day, and that was all about lead generation.
Yeah.
So those are the key things.
Yeah.
In terms of regulation, I'm against it because we're already regulated. There's the Estate Agency Act 1979. There's consumer legislation that affect us. Also, we need to be part of a redress scheme. That's part of it. That's a regulation. And I think that's done a lot to clean up the acts of estate agents. I think to have the regulation that's been proposed under ROPA, the regulation of property agents that Lord Best is proposing, he's a very nice guy, but he knows I don't agree with him, because what you'd end up having is every single agent in the country having to do some course every year, continuous professional development. It's hundreds of pounds per person. All the governing bodies all love it because they'll make money out of those things. Or agents will probably love it because it raises the barriers to entry. Consumers won't love it because fees will go up. So I think it's bad for consumers and not needed. And so I'm against it, and I don't know where the government will go on it, but certainly our view would be don't go there. The interesting thing, of course, if you look at the letting side of the business, about 50% of properties let in this country are let direct by landlords to the tenant. Now, Richard Best has not got a solution for that. Lord Best hasn't got a solution for that. So you're only going to regulate half the lettings market, so it's not even going to be all-encompassing. And if you look at some of the other areas of the economy that have been regulated, look at financial services. The cost of regulation of financial services in this country, just for the regulators, is around £1 billion a year. Would anybody say there are no problems in financial services in the UK? Look at London Capital and Finance. Look at Woodford. Look at HBOS, Lloyd's HBOS. Look at RBS GRG. Look at all the personal payment insurance, all that kind of stuff. Payment protection insurance, sorry. All that kind of stuff. PPI scandal. All those things happen in a regulated sector. And regulation is not necessarily the answer.
No. What extent would you say the new self-employed model goes to improving standards in the industry? Because from my view, obviously running a brokerage, the journey agents have to go on, and to make it a success is so tough. It's really, really difficult to make it as a self-employed agent. My view is that alone will mean that as that sector of the market becomes more established, that the bar will become higher naturally. Would you agree with that, or have any?
Yeah, I do, because I think what you're describing, I think, is competition being the best regulator. And that's how I welcome it. Typically setting up an office, getting to break even, you're probably talking investment of at least six figures, probably 100 to 200,000 minimum. That's when I was doing this. So that's very prohibitively high for a lot of people. A lot of agents can't have that money, but still want to be self-employed. Well, on a self-employed model, the cost of entry is much lower. So that increases competition, and competition should mean that consumers have better choice and better outcomes on that basis. So I think it's the future. I think, and that's technology that's doing that, of course, in terms of the ability to work more remotely. I think in terms of the core things you need to be, I discussed earlier, the personal contacts you have, the personability of the agent, and their competitive drive mean that distributed model, I think, could be very successful in the future, because offices are less important than they were. So I think it's a welcome evolution. It increases competition.
So let's move on to your journey in politics now, before we get into kind of the meat of the housing crisis. What was it that first kind of caused you to be involved in politics? Did you have an inspiration to do that, or was it something that you wanted to do for a long while? What was the story?
Yeah, it was a family inspired thing, really. Not my family was into politics themselves. They hadn't been. My dad was a town councillor. But my sister was really into it. She was 8 years older than me. So when I was 13, she was at Manchester University, studying politics. So she'd come back on a weekend and argue with my dad and my mum about the way political, systems and communism and Marxism, all that kind of stuff, which really used to wound him up. So we'd have these debates around the dining room table, and I think our parents used to encourage us to share our views, even when we were younger and had less knowledge or experience. So I got the bug then, really. So about 13, 14, I thought, I'm going to give this a go. I probably like an argument as well, or a good debate. And so I carried that through to school, and we used to have little debates at school and stuff. But I wanted to go off and earn some money and do well and build some credibility in terms of a career for myself. But I always thought one day I'll come back to that. And lucky enough, the opportunity kind of fell into my lap. My home seat came up in 2014, and I applied and got selected by the skin of my teeth, and kind of the rest is history. Because if you're selected as a Conservative candidate in parts of North Yorkshire like mine, Thirsk and Malton, you're pretty likely to get elected, and that's proven to be the case.
Can you think of some ways that your business career, and specifically your property industry expertise, has shaped your political journey?
Yeah, I'm in the job I thought I would never be given. With something with housing in the title as a ministry.
I know the industry were waiting for it for a long while.
Well, I know, and there's a received wisdom that they never give the job to somebody who's been in the industry, because they kind of know too much, and they might not just do what's the government's agenda. I think what I'm talking in a length about where I think sometimes political parties get that wrong. It's all set from the top and special advisors rather than using the experience and expertise of people in the lower ministerial ranks and stuff. So yes, the property experience is useful. There's been far too many housing ministers, and I hope to be in this role for some time. And I think we can make some progress if that's the case, particularly if we get back into government, of course. But more generally, the business experience I think is invaluable. It gives you credibility. When you come to this place, you want to be able to talk with authority on something. And because I've built a business from scratch to something significant, you've got some credibility to do that. So I think people listen on that being the case. So that's useful. But also you learn in business when you're working for yourself how to get things done.
Mm.
You just can't afford to take no for an answer in business. You can't wait for that person to make good on their promises. You got to run through brick walls, and that's what I've tried to do in here at times, is not take no for an answer, keep banging on about something. And three things you need to do, I think, to get anything done in life: you build a compelling case, a simple, compelling case. You build a coalition of people that are going to support it, and then you're just relentless and persistent. And you do those things, and that's the same in business as it is in politics, and that's what I've tried to do, and it's proven successful to some degree.
So, last question before we get into the housing crisis, and this is just more about your life as an MP. What do you think the most misunderstood things are from the public's perspective about what it means to be an MP?
I think it's the fact that all 650 MPs in this place, I think, maybe one or two exceptions, are thoroughly decent people who are trying to do their best for other people, many of whom they've made big sacrifices to do this job, financially or family or whatever else. And I think the media, the public, and ourselves are to blame for this at times, is that we rubbish each other. And the public rubbishes us at times. That's not all of them. Some are very nice and very grateful for what you do, and the media need to be the same. So I think the reputation of politics is unfairly tarnished by that approach, which is bad for all of us because it stops good people stepping forward. So I think, really, my experience is on either side of the house, really good people trying to do the right thing.
Great stuff. So moving on to the housing crisis, could you just give us an overview from your perspective about what the housing crisis is and what do you think the root causes are?
Well, the housing crisis actually is an affordability crisis. Mm-hmm. So, and the root causes, of course, are not building enough houses. I mean, one law will never repeal in this place is the law of supply and demand. So if you're not building enough houses, you will see prices going up. So, but the biggest issue is most people can find a house. I mean, there's renting something is probably more difficult, but nevertheless, most people can find a house if they've got enough money to pay for it. The difficulty is that question: can they afford to pay for it? So, really, the biggest issue we have is the affordability crisis, and that's properties to rent and properties to buy. And that's what we should be working on. And I think one of the problems one of the mistakes we make is when we say, "Oh, that's just about building more houses because we'll sort it out through building more houses." And of course, you'd think we would because it's a supply and demand issue. But the supply and demand equation is so far out of kilter, I don't think that's possible within a few years. It would take decades to do that. So there has to be other interventions that make a difference in terms of solving those problems today, because people just can't wait 20 years to solve that housing affordability crisis.
When it comes to, I suppose, the supply and demand of the rental market, if we start with that, landlords have taken a bit of a beating over, I suppose, the past 10 years, and more recently with the Renters' Rights Bill, there's a lot of support for tenants. But from my experience as running an agency that manages properties and speaking to a lot of landlords, the vast majority of landlords care deeply about the kind of quality of property and experience their tenants have. But it still seems to be driving a lot of people out of the sector, reducing new properties coming to the market. Do you think that is having, or is one of the main contributing factors to what we've seen happen to rents over the past few years? Or do you think that there's more at play there?
No, I think there is definitely an exit in terms of people moving up the market. I mean, what people don't, I think in here we get wrong is think all regulation is really good because it helps consumers, helps tenants in that particular case as this particular area. Well, a heavily regulated sector that's really good in terms of a specific problem for a tenant isn't very much good if that tenant can't find a house to rent. So if you overregulate, it drives people out of the marketplace, and it drives them disproportionately out of people who are landlords with small portfolios. The people like L&G, the people like Granger, these large organisations will cope with regulation just fine. But the landlords with a few properties have much more at stake. So when you say to a landlord, well, you might have 8 months without rent and you can't use the normal Section 21 process to get somebody out of a house at the end of a term who's a difficult tenant, then you're saying to that landlord's going to think, well, I've had various things thrown at me over the years, increasing regulation in terms of standards, some which are perfectly reasonable, some which aren't, such as the way the treatment of mortgage interest relief, I thought was a mistake by our own government, because it disproportionately hits smaller landlords with smaller portfolios, which cannot be good for choice, because you're driving people out of the sector, particularly choice when you're looking at non-standard. I mean, people in here, a lot of people who are city-based, think of the private rented sector as being all blocks of flats and that kind of stuff. Well, as you know, as I know, it can be a little cottage in a village. It can be a 3-bed semi. It can be a 4-bed detached. Landlords who own 1 or 2 houses are much more likely to be responsible for letting that kind of property. So the choice will be dramatically limited because that tenant, that landlord, will be thinking, "Why you can't afford 9 months without rent?" And so the risk-reward ratio changes, and people will be driven out of the sector. And we've seen this in Scotland, where they did exactly the same. They abolished no-fault evictions, and you've seen about a 10% decline in terms of stock availability in that sector. And you've seen bigger rent increases because one thing is connected to another.
With new builds, obviously the Labour government have got the target of building 1.5 million homes in this Parliament. Do you think that's achievable? And what do you think the things that would get in the way of them doing that I imagine still existed for the Conservative government before that? Are they making changes that are going to alleviate this problem?
No, I don't think it's deliverable. I don't say that with any pleasure because I want to see more homes built. And if you look at what we built over the last 10 years in office, we averaged 207,000 homes per year. Net new additions is what the number we're all talking about here. So it's not actually numbers of homes being built. It also includes permitted development. It includes properties that have been converted into a number of flats or those kind of things. So net new additions averaged 207,000 a year. That was a 50-year record, even higher than the 1970s, which was a golden era of house building because they were knocking lots of houses down in the 1970s. So highest in 50 years. Now to go 50% higher than that. So 1 million in last Parliament we delivered is hugely difficult, very difficult. There are some interesting things they're doing planning-wise, some which I support, some which I don't support. But one thing they're doing alongside that is they are reorganising local government rights across the country. So everywhere with a 2-tier council, where you've got districts and counties, all been abolished, the districts and the counties, and then that council will be reformed. We've done that in North Yorkshire. It takes years to do that, at least 2 to 3 years. Yeah. And every single person in that council has to reapply for their job, including the planning officers. So it's not a recipe for rapid delivery, even from a standing start. It's not a standing start. Actually, it's moving back a bit and trying to move forward. So there are some interesting things. They're talking about zoning, which is interesting. The other thing they are talking about stripping away call-in powers for councillors. At the moment, a councillor can ask for any application to be heard by the planning committee. They're looking at stripping that away, which I think is bad for democracy, actually. But and also the shifting where the burden lies in terms of delivery from urban areas into rural areas, which I think is unfair on rural areas. You know, if you look at it, the rate of increase in delivery is 50%. It's 1 million over a Parliament to 1.5 million over a Parliament, 50% increase. Well, you see, urban areas, largely urban areas, are up by about 15%, not 50%. Rural areas, on average, 115% up. I think that's unfair. There will be pushback against it, and it's more difficult to deliver homes in those locations because of the shortage of infrastructure.
Yeah. I've heard you describe that as a war on rural England. I live in the Harbour district, so next door to Rutland, a very small council. I think the population of, what is it, like 41,000 or something. And these, you're talking about local authorities merging there. I guess that's off the back of the English devolution white paper, isn't it? And
right.
I think there's uncertainty about what that means for smaller areas like Rutland. And I know in those sort of areas, they realise there's got to be progress, and then there is a need for new housing. But then there are going to be powers for elected mayors to be able to call in applications, and they're trying to use these merged areas to deliver the housing targets that these bigger authorities have got. What do you think is that a real risk for these rural communities? Do you think these elected mayors will suddenly see their countryside being kind of overruled by mayors calling in these using these powers to pass through planning applications? And will they be subjected to the same level of scrutiny as they would normally? Like, what does this mean for the nice villages of Rutland, for example?
Well, that's exactly what's going to happen. And it will mean that mayors who are predominantly city-based will be overseeing the delivery, strategic planning policies over a wide area, including rural areas. And I don't think, therefore, those mayors will be as keen to protect those rural areas as you see current rural councils. At the same time, the reason I call it a war on rural England is because there's housing targets, but also they're abolishing rural councils. Reality, your new councils will be much bigger. The change in the way funding is delivered, things like the Rural Services Delivery Grant, scrapped, which recognise it costs more to deliver services in rural areas. The way they're distributing money for social care, changing a formula away from need, which is what social care, you think it would go where the need is, to deprivation, which has nothing to do with social care. I mean, not really. And of course, classically, the family farm tax, taking away agricultural property relief, which means family farms will have to be sold rather than passed on to the next generation. That's what it means. It's a war on rural England. It's totally wrong. It's done ideologically. I'm totally against it, and we'll keep fighting the good fight.
I want to end the conversation by talking about something else that you have. We've already touched on this, but a lot of expertise in, but something I understand that you're quite passionate about, which is SMEs and supporting small businesses. What changes do you think that the UK would need to make to be a better place for entrepreneurs?
Most importantly, improve access to finance. Everything else pales into insignificance alongside that.
I was just going to say that one of the reasons that I've managed to be able to get Hortons off the ground is through a startup loan scheme. And so I have personal experience of these things impacting me.
Fantastic.
But
great to hear.
Yeah,
and that's a scheme that we delivered. It's built on it mirrors a scheme in Germany. It's been there for a long time. As you know, you get up to £25,000 loan per director. So if you've got a couple of directors, you can get up to 50. So it's a business plan. And one of the reasons you're 3 times more likely to start a business if your parents are in business, as I said right at the start, because maybe your parents, if they're in business, has a few quid they might lend you, which is usually a help. But this is trying to replicate that, really. So what you've got for SMEs at the moment in the UK is market failure when it comes to access to finance. A certain, in that bottom tier, and that's why startup loans are there. Government should not interfere in the economy, really, where it can help it, but only really when it's not a fair and level playing field, or there's market failure. And with access to finance, there's market failure. So the startup loans is a great scheme. £1 billion been led to about 100,000 businesses. But there's more we need to do. We've got some good things in terms of equity schemes like seed enterprise investment scheme, the venture capital trust, incentives, all those kind of things. But in terms of debt finance, we've still got a gap.
Mm-hmm.
As something business minister, as I used to be, I was determined to help to try and fill. We've got some ideas in our I got squeezed in our manifesto that's now redundant now, of course. But things like regional mutual banks would have a different emphasis. Banks that are looking at the productive economy in an area rather than just thinking how much money I can make,
Mm.
would help. Also, we're trying to do data, opening databases up, like we did with open banking, right across the economy, potentially for something like a SME finance marketplace opportunity. So there are some real interesting things we were delivering upon that we'll try and make sure this government delivers on too. But that's the number one area that we can make a massive difference to the entrepreneurial community in the UK, is helping people with that bit of finance to get started.
Yeah. Well, after I took the startup loan scheme, we also benefited from the SEIS scheme as well.
Brilliant.
And so yeah, that's it's these things in action.
Well, can I just say on the startup loans company, and you can Google it and go onto there if people are thinking of starting their own business up. Castori, the people who make the shirts now for the England cricket team and football team and lots of different professional football teams around the country, and many other countries, they started with a startup loan on their kitchen table.
So through that level of support, the amount of jobs that have been created and contributions to the economy is
phenomenal.
Yeah,
the UK is a brilliantly entrepreneurial society. You know, we have more unicorns. I mean, Castori is a unicorn. So business has gone from zero valuation to $1 billion valuation market cap. We have more than France, Germany, Sweden put together. We have a fantastic entrepreneur base in the UK. We just need to help them a bit in terms of accessing finance.
What do you think to the number of entrepreneurs leaving the UK now, though? What I've read something that expected to lose 10,000 millionaires or people that are exiting to places like Dubai and. Do you think that's going to be a continuing trend? Like, what needs to change to stop that happening?
Well, this is some of the things that the government's brought in, which was a big mistake, you know. And I think what they've done, as you'll know, is done something very similar to businesses that have done to farmers. Instead of, if you want to pass your business on to the next generation, you're now going to pay inheritance tax when you do that for the first time for a long time, and that means lots of businesses will have to be sold, and that's devastating. So, and obviously other tax changes too, and capital gains tax increases. So, national insurance obviously increased. So the number of things and more coming down the track in terms of red tape, and so yeah, I mean, I think there's just short of 11,000 millionaires left. I think there's about 78. People with £100 million or more left, and I think there's about a dozen billionaires left. That can't be good for our economy.
No, not. It doesn't say a lot in terms of the UK being a good place to do business, but also the contributions that those people must pay in taxes would be enormous.
Huge. So, yeah. I mean, people, the top 1% today pay 30% of all our taxes. If you look 20 years ago, it was only 25%. The world's getting fairer. The UK is getting fairer. And those people are now saying, oh, I'm off. And the burden will be carried by the rest of us, of course, which cannot be good. And it's not just the direct effect of those people leaving. It's what it says to people who are thinking of starting their own business. You weaken the incentives, it'll mean fewer people take the choice you've made. And what I respect about anybody who's starting in business, and people don't tell you when you start, probably thankfully, you work twice the hours for half the money. It is the toughest thing to do. It's massively competitive. I take my hat off to anybody who tries. Despite even more so the ones that are successful. But don't worry about failing. Just give it a go. The key to all this is to be to fear failure, but not be afraid of failure. And so we should be encouraging more people to start up. And I think, I'm sorry at the moment, I think this government is discouraging people.
On the point of failure, I mean, we spoke earlier about how the role of failure has been crucial in your own journey, but it seems like our society as a whole has a bit of a, it's a different perspective on failure that you don't find in other places like the US. They think about it completely differently. What do you think needs to happen to start to change that? Because failure is going to be the number one reason, other than the access to finance, that people don't make that jump to become an entrepreneur. It's about people saying, I told you that wouldn't happen, or what your friends or family might think.
I think we're different people to Americans, like culturally. I mean, two nations separated by a common language, whatever it is. We're different, and I'm proud of this country. You know, we're modest. We don't go shout our success to the rooftops. You know, that kind of stuff. So, which I think is quite a nice thing. But I've got to say, I think lots of things these days. I think things are moving a little bit. I mean, Dragon's Den, the Apprentice, that kind of stuff. I think they're really good showcases for people who are thinking of starting a business. I think it's a glamorous world. I loved it. I mean, of course, there'll always be envious people. There will be in the States as well. You're going to find everywhere, whether they talk like that or not. So, yeah, of course, we should celebrate success where people have it. And I think it's brilliant when you see businesses that become those unicorns. It's not, and they're not all tech businesses. We've got obviously the Revoluts in this world and the Zuplas, unicorns, but Brewdog, a brewery, a brewing beer in the garage, and a unicorn. You got Gymshark, started drop shipping vitamins and ends up a clothing manufacturer, billion-pound company. These are fantastic. Oak North. These are fantastic people, entrepreneurs, businesses. And we should all celebrate them, and I think that's the kind of mentality we want. I think a lot of people do. The rest of them should do that as well.
With Labour's current cabinet, there are no members of that cabinet that have got business experience. What's your view on that? Do you think entrepreneurs bring a unique approach to politics? And why don't we see more of it? Why don't we see some of the people that you just described who can make things happen, who are hugely successful and people look up to entering the political arena?
I think it's really, the point about the current cabinet, I think it's terrible. Because you really do not understand this world until you've lived in it, until you've, literally laid awake at night when you're going to pay the bills.
That's literally what I was thinking when they're changing the national insurance contributions and thinking that not one of those people has had to be on that journey.
No. They just think their view, I'll just suck it up. Make loads of money. They just don't understand it.
Yeah.
Which is really, really dangerous. And even more so the fact that lots of people in Labour ranks these days have come from a professional union background. You see, the policy choices are very much union-led. The settlements of wages for public sector workers, train drivers, or indeed some of the red tape coming down the track with the Employment Rights Bill, which is very damaging piece of legislation for small, medium-sized enterprises. So why don't business people, come in? Well, I guess that the successful ones have probably made enough money to think, oh, what the hell, I don't need that life. It's hassle, and I get that. We've all got skeletons in our cupboard. People are worried about that, and the way the media is, the way we are with each other, and you could easily fall foul of that, of course. So there's various different reasons. I would love more people to step in and join the world of politics. My good friend Conservative MP James Cartledge, entrepreneur. Jeremy Hunt's an entrepreneur. Most of our cabinet, shadow cabinet, has worked in a business context. But we need more. We need a lot more. And anybody who's listening out there who's thinking of throwing the hat in the ring, politics isn't for everybody, but it's for anybody. If you think you've got something to offer, then there's plenty of room in here for good people.
My final question for you is, what are you optimistic about?
Lots. This country, we've got a fantastic country. We should be so proud of this country in terms of, this is what really annoyed me over the last 8 months, is the talking down of our economy. And now suddenly Rachel Reeves got this boosterism, we should be more positive. That is so ironic. My God, we're the fifth largest exporter in the world. We're grown the third fastest in the G7 since 2010. We were fastest in the G7 this year. Second largest exporter in the world. More unicorns than France, Germany, Sweden put together. We've got the best universities in the world. We've got full employment. We've got so much good about it. We've got freedom of speech, democracy, all those kind of things. So much good about this country. We should be so proud of it. So all those things, but I think we could do so much better. We've done that despite the fact we've been really running on one cylinder in terms of the economy, particularly around things like access to finance for SMEs. If we get that right, we'll turbocharge the economy, which pays for everything else. It isn't just about business here, but the taxes businesses pay and the taxes that people they employ pays for every single public service we have in this country. So we should never forget that. So the better we get that, the better everything does. And the other area we've got wrong is levelling up in this country. So the economic difference in output terms between the northeast of England and London, the southeast, the differential in relative terms is wide as it was between East and West Germany prior to reunification.
Wow.
Now, imagine we get that right. But it'll take us 3 decades, and that's what we've got to be honest about it, because that infrastructure delivery takes a long time, and that's the key to it. Skills delivery takes time. But if we get that right, how positive could we be for our economy in terms of how we be able to make sure people then get great public services? So all that is within our gift.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really optimistic that we will eventually deliver on it.
Huge amounts of untapped potential in all of that. Yeah.
And one thing Boris used to say is that, talent is spread equally around this country, but opportunity is not. And that's what an opportunity that is.
Well, I think that's quite a nice note to leave it on. And thank you again for your time. I know you've got a very busy schedule. Really fascinating conversation. So thanks again, Kevin Hollinrake.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you very much.